You're listening to Feel Good Astrology with Louisa Tanner Munson. To request a personal reading with Louisa, go to www.feelgoodastrology.com.
Hi, this is Louisa Tanner Munson, and this is the continuation of the Chiron series, where I'm looking at the position that Chiron is at the time of your birth. And by position, I'm not necessarily talking about the actual star sign, but I'm actually talking about the house that Chiron fell into. So I'll be talking about that and how that might affect the wounding that you experience in life, and possibly techniques or strategies that you can use to overcome the wounding and make sense of it in your life. And also talking about what happens when Chiron transits through a particular house. So this is the one about the fifth house. So if you were born with a fifth house Chiron, this is the track for you. So what does a fifth house Chiron mean? First of all, I think we have to consider the main characteristics of the fifth house. And I see the fifth house as really being the seat of our creation. It's a little bit like the sacral chakra. It's the place where all of our yearnings, it's like our cosmic womb. It's where our yearnings take us. So the things that we want to give birth to show up in the fifth house. So what kind of things do people want to give birth to? I guess it's a bit like creativity. So the creativity that you have within you, your desire to create and adapt your world and change your world and fill it with beauty, is what's represented in the fifth house. So one of the most obvious things that the fifth house represents is children and childbirth and pregnancy and fertility. So it really looks at all of those themes as being pretty vital to people who have lots of stuff going on in the fifth house. It also is a place where romance and sexuality come in. So, for instance, if you think about when you meet somebody, you have this welling up of a feeling that you sort of give birth to. Obviously, that sounds like a mixed metaphor, but this welling up of emotion is something that you're creating within your mind-body system. And so it's that creativity that comes up when you feel that sense of love, the new sense of dating, the sort of emergence of things. And it's the same with sexual emotion and sexual energy. It shows up in the fifth house, definitely. It's a very sexy place where you're stirred to create something of beauty. And it's the same for creative people. So people who feel stirred to give of themselves, give something that's beautiful. So it could be music or art or cooking or planting, whatever it is that really stirs you to create and share your creations in the world is something that traditionally comes under the fifth house rulership. So anyone with a fifth house that's a little bit busy tends to have themes of birthing going on, or when an important planet is going through the fifth house in your chart, then there is a very strong birthing phase. But what happens when you've got Chiron, the wounded healer, in this area of birthing? And I'm using this word birthing. I want to just stress that the birthing is the urge to create, the urge to fill the world with the yearnings of your soul. It sounds very romantic, and it is, I guess. If you think about the fifth house, astrologically, the fifth house is ruled by Leo and the sun. And the sun is a very, very creative planet. You know, if you think of the sun in the tarot deck, it represents ultimate creativity, the musician, the artist, giving birth. It represents all those themes. And the fifth house is very innocent and childlike. So people with a strong fifth house tend to be very playful and very light-hearted. So it's a wonderful place to be. And I guess if you're looking at the astrology, of the fifth house, it naturally follows on from the fourth house, which is to do with setting up of the order of your home and your belief systems. And I guess from that level of stability can come the yearnings of creation. So once you've got your ducks in a row, there's this feeling that maybe I want to create something to make my environment beautiful. So there's all these themes going on. So when you've got the wounded healer in the fifth house, there's an insecurity about your creations. There's an insecurity, possibly that you don't feel worthy enough to create, that you love creating things, but when you do, you don't have the confidence of them, and that you think that they're not very valuable. Or possibly that you create lots of things out of your pain. I mean, that's a great expression of using Chiron in that area. So, for instance, people that might be into art therapy, helping people overcome their pain through a creative process would have that. I know somebody who has a very, very strong design process going on and uses design to create social projects. That's a very sort of fifth house Chiron kind of energy to work with. So this is somebody who might be doing social things using Chiron. But imagine that you haven't got to the level where you might be expressing the energy freely in that way. What kind of issues might come up for somebody with a fifth house Chiron that is unaware of it? Well, I guess one of the feelings is stagnation. So this person feels like they're not free to create. Maybe they've grown up in a household or in a society that they feel stifled by. And one of their biggest pains is that feeling of not being free to express, or being put down and told off for their expressions. It's somebody that feels sad when they express, because when they're expressing, it brings up past pain. So there is almost like a cutting off point. Now, that kind of stuff going on in childhood can be remedied, especially if you notice that in your children, or if that's a tendency that you have. You can remedy it fairly easily, because it's not something that necessarily is one of the difficult. It's not one of the hardest areas to have in your fifth house. But as an adult, if the feeling of being cut off from your creativity isn't really corrected by the time you get into adulthood, then there is an insecurity about expressing the things that you're passionate about, because the fifth house is about passion and creativity. So imagine someone in their early teens, in their early adulthood, disconnecting from sexual experience or disconnecting from loving experiences, which, to be fair, are some of the most fundamental experiences that we grow from and we learn from. Very few people are fortunate enough to meet the one, or one of many, in their formative years. Most of our early dabblings do lead to heartbreak, but they're the kinds of things that do stir our soul. But if you imagine the Chiron in the fifth house energy, there's almost a fear of relating. There's a fear of your sexuality. There could be a fear of conceiving. There could be a fear of becoming a parent. So there's some wounds that, I guess, if the creativity isn't established really, really well early on, that could grow into a fear of self-expression that could have much bigger implications as you grow older. Obviously, Chiron can show up in really awful ways. There are lots of people on the planet that experience sexual abuse and things like that, and it wouldn't be inconceivable to suppose that Chiron might be found here. I've not seen it in any of my clients, but I haven't tended to have that many clients recently that have experienced that kind of trauma. I think the kinds of clients astrologers tend to attract, in my experience, tend to be clients that are going through similar stages to yourself, or for instance, if I'm talking about Chiron, I will often have a lot of people contact me for readings who have a big Chiron issue going on. So I think your consciousness attracts the likely consciousness. And now that I'm in a phase of active motherhood and marriage and healing, a lot of the people that come to me are actually in a very similar phase, or are considering it and working through the blocks to it. So I guess that's one reason why I haven't recently seen sort of sexual expression issues, possibly from abuse or possibly from a feeling of restriction from childhood. However, I have seen Chiron implicated in the 5th house with people who doubt their ability to conceive, from people who experience disappointment that they're with the wrong partner or haven't met the right partner. So it can easily represent the kind of sadness that somebody might feel, that their fertility could be waning and they're not getting the chance to fully express themselves in the way that their heart, their body and their soul might want to express themselves. So there are quite a few issues that can come up with a 5th house Chiron, especially if the confidence in your ability to express your full body and express your full passion and emotion is stunted from childhood. So that's always the thing to watch out for in clients that have a 5th house Chiron. The best ways to overcome that are to work with the energy of Chiron through fear, I guess. Like, look at if you look at the opposite of creativity. So I guess infertility is one word that you could use for not being creative and not being able to creatively express yourself. Another word, it's almost anti-life, which again is another sort of allusion to fertility, because life and creativity and fertility and the whole birthing process of sowing seeds, it's all part of a natural process, and it's all linked in together. So one of the first ways of working through this is to work through the barrier to this, which is often fear, and a fear to be vulnerable to the whole process. So people who are worried that their expressions aren't going to be appreciated or understood often feel vulnerable about expressing themselves, in the same way that a single person who is desperately looking to meet their significant other and to create that, to give birth to a love affair, might not make themselves vulnerable enough because they fear rejection. So you've got fear, you've got rejection, you have a sort of impermeability. It's almost like putting up a brick wall of protection. It's like a seed that has such a hard shell on the outside that the little seed can't actually break through. So it's working with the fears in this case that really help to create some movement and get things working. So I think it's usually small steps. And also working with children, like with each of the different Chiron places I've said where your teachers might be, where your gurus might be. First house, it was like a spiritual leader. Second house, your guru is yourself. You're using self-help. The third house, it's everyone around you becomes your teacher. In the fourth house, it's about the home. But in the fifth house, it's small people. It's creative people. It's people who have the innocence and the freedom. Freedom's a great word for this house. So it's the fifth house that people and influences that can really help you. So you learn from the children, you learn from innocent people, you learn from people who are free and find out what it is that makes them free. So it's a great place when Chiron, if we're moving on to what happens when Chiron goes through the fifth house, you have an opportunity to learn and express and to move innocently through life. It's almost like reconnecting with your inner child. And if you think again about where Chiron has just been in the fourth house, which is about your family and your behaviours and the behaviors that have come from your childhood pain. That's all quite intense stuff. But as you release that, you automatically move into a fifth house domain, which is about reconnecting to grace, reconnecting to innocence, and giving birth to a new you. It's like you're gestating a new you. So this is a deeply spiritual place to get to, that allows you to feel freedom and allows you to connect to your purpose. Quite a good house, actually, really, to have Chiron going through if you're already moving through the Chiron energy. But as often happens, the Chiron energy, the wounded healer, picks up on some of our deepest, darkest fears about ourselves. And where we hold ourselves back because we're a little bit too embarrassed or ashamed to say what we're feeling, we might just experience the stoppage of our creativity. So for people who really do want to conceive in this time, having Chiron go through your fifth house isn't saying you can't give birth. Obviously, lots of people will have a fifth house Chiron transit that can give birth and can fall in love and can have a sexual relationship and can create something of great beauty from their passion. But what it's saying is you have to overcome your fear first, and you have to connect to the innocence and grace in life and find your freedom. Whew. That felt like I was channeling a little bit there. And of course, channeling would come into the fifth house because it is almost like a transmission of grace, a transmission that comes from the pit of your soul. So anyway, hopefully that fifth house synopsis will be useful for you. And if you are going through anything like this and are feeling disconnected from the freedom that you might have to create all the things that you want to bring into the world, all the beauty, then do please look me up, and I'm sure we can talk through your themes and look for some ways to work with the energy. Anyway, lots of love. Take care.
You've been listening to Feel Good Astrology with Louisa Tanner Munson, and this recording has been made possible by all you lovely supporters at Patreon. To request a personal reading with Louisa, go to www.feelgoodastrology.com.